My background is I studied the sympathetic nervous system and brain. The sympathetic nervous system is the biochemical center of health in humans, animals, and plants for over 30 years, and it has shared biochemical drivers with the brain. I have patent work in that, and that patent work speaks directly to the space of physical trauma to the head.
Okay, now as we've spoken time and time again, and this is the first time we've actually connected on air, there are a lot of things around out there that aren't necessarily kosher.
I was having a conversation about that the other day. I used to have, and I know you know this, I used to have a big chip on my shoulder. I used to be what I used to call a pissed off sports mom about all those things. And really I came to learn some things over the last couple of years, one of which being is I might be smarter than I thought I was. Okay, so there's that. The other thing is I think a lot of these people are really trying to do the right thing. They're trying to find some solutions the best they can, but they are not the right answers, and they're often not the right approaches. And that I'm also extremely lucky. I studied the Biochemical Center of Health and Brain, so it would make a great deal of sense that I would understand this differently than other people do, right? And so I've made some peace with my pissed off sports mom, and now I'm kind of more of a scientist. So, but yeah, I appreciate you, giving me an opportunity to address that.
Well, let's take a step back, because as we spoke before, you come at this from an actual reason for being pissed off sports mom, or understanding this. So if you don't mind, if you want to, give a little background as to where you come from as far as
my own mild traumatic brain injury. So I studied the sympathetic nervous system and brain for, 25 years at that point, roughly, or 23 years, because it manages pain, moods, the immune system, and addiction. And I have several herniated discs. And I lost all my friends and family for studying all these years because they thought I was either a crazy genius or I didn't know what I was talking about. And I walked away from my work. There's a meeting, which I call a spiritual meeting, that I had that's becoming kind of a famous conversation about me, and that is, it's a little eccentric, but I had a meeting with the dead scientists who I studied. They were all Nobel Prize winning scientists, about the quality of my work. And we agreed about the quality of the work and the value of the work and its worth. And I walked away from it. And less than a year later, I was delivered a mild traumatic brain injury via my occipital lobe, which is more towards the base of your skull, from electricity. And so I ended up having this whole situation that I even didn't understand at the time, because we don't equate a concussion to the destruction of your health. We don't equate concussion to seizures. We don't equate concussion to all of these other things that many, many people experience, which are now known to be mild traumatic brain injury. So I went through that for about 5 years. I was actually too poor to buy the raw materials to try to make this stuff, which honestly didn't occur to me. My brain was bad off enough that I, hadn't even considered my own work might work. And then I met a doctor who became my doctor, was a professor of medicine at Michigan State University, Dr. Todd Holmes. And my first visit with Todd, he said 2 things to me. One is, you're very lucky to have learned what you learned and know what you know. And 2 is, you don't have to go through this alone anymore, at which point I bawled, right? So.
Well, and I think that's the thing that, as we've talked about, that's the important thing, is that we can learn more as we learn more of what other people are doing, and understand what we debunk and what we don't debunk, and understanding that some people are trying, as you said, some people are really trying, but some of them aren't on the right path.
Right. And, and I'm not going to continue to stick up for them. I thought it was appropriate for me to give the balanced conversation, but I think that everybody's addressing this from the wrong perspective. I think it's very easy to see that concussion is a biochemical explosion in the brain. It is not a physiological explosion, right? Yes, certainly biochemistry creates physiology. If there are scientists out there watching, I understand that very plainly. Teach doctors and scientists all the time. But we know that this is a biochemical explosion in the brain. Dr. Omalu's own paper page 1, I believe it's paragraph 2, sentence 2, says that they witnessed a mild to moderate neuronal dropout in the frontal, parietal, and temporal neocortex, which is the entire brain, of pigmented neurons, which are a result of, for in lay terms, which most people understand, dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin, right? Those are the things that people are deficient when they're on antidepressants. So it's a pretty simple biochemical conversation. It's a pretty simple biochemical solution, in my opinion. But when we look at the market space that would be used for that, which would be antidepressants, SSRI antidepressants don't actually create dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin in any measure. They hold on to the serotonin you have, which is only a third of the answer, and it's inadequate, which is why there were a number of other drugs that kind of came out for this. I think my favorite commercial, and I've told you this, Frank, is a commercial for a product that says it was created for the 85% of people on antidepressants who are still experiencing symptoms of depression. And the pharmaceutical industry recognizes this at this point. They have dropped their spending to develop new antidepressants by 70% over the last 10 years. So we have a lot of conversations beyond physical head trauma going on here, but the physical head trauma is a real, it's an obvious conversation. And I entered this really from the pissed off sports mom position. I wanted to help our kids. That's what it's about for us. So there is something worth mentioning about physical trauma to the head. So Boston University, Dr. Bob Cantu made a video about this, that people who have pre-existing depression, anxiety, or ADD are more likely to get a concussion, even at a lesser rate of impact. And it's more likely to turn into post-concussion syndrome. And of course, we know that depression, anxiety, and ADD are those things, are deficiencies of those neurotransmitters as well. So we have an answer that answers a lot of things, right? And really causes a protective mechanism by enhancing brain permeability in the brain through enhancing those neurotransmitters. And of course, then when you're deficient those neurotransmitters from physical trauma to the head, then it seems obvious what the answer is to that as well.
Is it safe to say that one of the things we're looking at are more masking instead of solving? As far
well, you know, it depends on the thing. I mean, I have expertise in all of these things, so I could speak to them item by item. Medicines, I don't even think, pharmaceutical medicines at present, I don't even think are able to really mask. I mean, I think when you speak to, you know, one of the things that we do a lot of things differently, by the way, but one of the things that we do differently is we ask every single one of our clients to take our work to their doctor. We don't do that just so it's because it's marketing hype. We don't do that. We do that because we want them to feel safe. And even a bigger reason is we want the doctors to know we exist. All of my colleagues are doctors and scientists, right? So we want the doctors to know that this work exists because they're always impressed by it because of the other things that they can see we do differently, right? So patents and awards and mainstream awards. And you know, I won the Silver Stevie Award for Woman of the Year last year for my nonprofit, Purpose Driven, that does work with concussion for people who have I don't know, difficulty with finances, right? We've all been there. And so we want to deliver a confidence, not just to our clients, but to their physicians, because we see neurologists that wildly embrace our work. We see doctors that say, where did this woman come from? This is excellent work. So we stand at the top in our industry, but we make a really nice bridge for people to have a confidence that isn't always seen in a nutraceutical.
And one of the things that we've talked about before is that there was a disconnect between what people are doing and what we're trying to get done, and then what your primary care physician or whoever's doing the treatment is like. Okay, they were at odds, and we're trying to break down that door, and that's what it sounds like you're doing.
I think yes and no. I mean, I don't know if we are trying to break down the door. I think well, that's true, I think, Frank, but I think the barrier with physicians is, especially physicians who have passion for concussion, is they're so focused on kind of some existing technology that doesn't toe the line. For instance, there is a technology that is widely used in high schools and in physicians' offices to measure a baseline for athletes before the season starts. Now, we've made a copyright. You already know we have patents in the protection, we have patents in the resolution, we have patents in blood and urine tests that double as a method of seeing progress, and we have a copyrighted assessment tool that can be used clinically or at home. And so, so we've offered that to coaches as a baseline through Purpose Driven, through our nonprofit, so they can test kids for the baseline. And they tell us that the software, tests for the baseline. What we've learned is, and certainly the people that own the software know this, is that if one of those kids, one of those players, one of those even adults has pre-existing depression, anxiety, or ADD, they're going to get a read as if they already have had physical trauma to the head that has resulted in a concussion. And so we're seeing from that kids being sidelined, which of course creates a really deep discomfort within the team because these kids have not had physical trauma to the head. And so there's people that are kind of, the truth is I can't shame that, but it's not the right answer, right? So there's some ways that it could be implemented that are helpful, but overall, it is not the right answer. So when we're looking at things like, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to medical marijuana? Do you want to go to CBDs? Do you want to go to EEG? I mean, there's all these things on our Panacea Biomed website as the scientific reasons why these things are not effective. One of the big ones that's troubling to me and to my colleagues, that one of my colleagues is a doctor who is out of Hawaii, owned his own concussion clinic and physical rehabilitation clinic for 30 years, I believe, was the mouth guard. The mouth guard is the reason I stepped into this arena. No question. The mouth guard was disproven well over a decade ago. I'm in Minnesota, so the doctors I've spoken to outside of Minnesota find it laughable, but there's a company in Minnesota that raised almost $10 million in funding, right? If we're talking about the, physical force, there's a lot of companies that have headbands or necklaces or t-shirts or hats or whatever you can wear to measure the speed and velocity and force of the impact as a predictor for concussion. Those are also inconsistent because if you have a biochemical deficiency prior to physical trauma to the head, the probability of you having a concussion is much higher. So speed, force, and velocity of the impact are not good indicators. So all of these companies have already learned this. These companies know what I know, certainly, right? This is not just right. So I think it's time. I think it's time that we get to this answer and put this problem to bed for humanity, frankly.
Well, it's the idea of comparing apples to apples, right? It's like, okay, if you are susceptible to something, it doesn't matter what you're doing on the outside of it, you're already susceptible to it. So whether it's a mouth guard or a head wrap or whatever,